And I've been involved for maybe 6, 7 years with that. I also am at Western Carolina University. I've been there since 2002. And I guess I was teaching online back in 2006. That makes me feel, I look back, that was a long time ago to be teaching online. I've been doing it for a while. It made for a pretty good maternity leave back then. Uh, I did it. But since then, I've done uh, with Zoom and recently, I guess last semester, I've used Zoom and gotten way into Desmos. Our university uses web work because we're on a book rental system, and so we aren't able to use the fancy packages from publishers. So I also have some experience with that and our Blackboard suite.
And lastly, I'm Anne. I work at the University of Tennessee. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm currently a member of the new Tennessee Eastern and Appalachian Math Teacher Circles. We just formed, ran a couple of events, and then the pandemic hit. I was previously a member of the Coastal Carolina Math Teacher Circles, and I direct our online distance education master's program. So I've had more experience teaching online using Zoom, Canvas, the Google Suite, WebAssign, Piazza, and Overleaf. I want to mention today, first of all, yes, go Vols. Secondly, all three of us are practitioners for online teaching. Although some of us have done research in some capacity, we're not online teaching researchers in particular. So we want to give you 3 different perspectives about various things we've tried, some things that work, some technology, some tools, as well as some things that we didn't do correctly, in hopes that this will help you. So we will go ahead and first outline what we're going to talk about. I'll go through a few definitions just to make sure we're on the same page. Then Sloan and Emily will talk you through structuring class, how to engage students. We'll talk about a couple ideas for alternative assessments when you're teaching online, a little bit of advice, and then have some discussion at the end. Really quickly in the chat, if anyone wants to talk about how many years they've been teaching online, or maybe terms, if spring semester was the first time that you've ever done teaching online, go ahead and type that as we're chatting. So what is online teaching exactly? Let's make sure we're on the same page. There's multiple words that you might hear tossed around. So the very first one is just, what is an online course? An online course officially is just any in which 100% of the instruction is done electronically. You might hear words like synchronous or asynchronous used. What that means is a synchronous class is instruction where instructors and students are in different places, but for their online class, they're participating at the same time. Asynchronous, on the other hand, means that, again, instructors and students are in different places for online teaching, but they're participating at different times. These slides can be available later, by the way, in case anyone wants to look into the details of the references and so on. Okay. Some of you might have heard about using both synchronous and asynchronous components. So a hybrid class is just mixing those together, where some percentage is done electronically and some is done face-to-face. I should clarify, synchronous doesn't necessarily have to be online, but we usually use that since face-to-face courses are usually synchronously happen at the same time, right? So a hybrid course, for instance, a hybrid course with an online component might have maybe a few Zoom meetings throughout the week, and then also a discussion forum, which is the asynchronous part. A high flex, sorry, I just realized these two definitions were a little mixed up. The hybrid course is just synchronous and asynchronous blended. A high flex course is more of what I was describing, where there's some flexibility, where students can choose to participate in online, face-to-face, or some combination. So you might have heard this described without this term being necessarily used, but high flex, if you want to Google resources, is a term that you might want to know. A lot of people have been talking about this model in particular with the pandemic because people are anticipating that someone might have to choose for a different modality if they get sick or something like that. So we'll be talking a little bit about our experiences with various ones of these modalities. Sloan, if you want to continue.
Okay. So now I'm just going to talk about how you can structure a class. And y'all, basically, I've spent probably the first 2 weeks of June just trying to think about how I was going to structure my classes, looking at a spreadsheet. And I'll share with you what this 2 weeks of thought produced. And now I don't know, you may be totally underwhelmed, but I'm just going to kind of share with you a solution that I feel comfortable with for fall. So as your schools probably, our university is has recategorized all the classrooms, how many students fit in the classrooms, and basically some of the classrooms, the size means that instructors will meet with the classes face to face, a third, a third, a third at a time. A third of the class on Monday, a third Wednesday, a third Friday. Okay, I'm not going to teach face to face at all, actually, in the fall. I'm teaching totally online. But this idea of a third, a third, a third, it really, I thought, first of all, how's that even going to work? But how can I take that model and make that work for my online class? Because just seeing my son taking high school classes online with 35 other people, it's a lot on any synchronous kind of platform. It's a lot on Google Meet or Zoom. 35 folks, maybe they just kind of drop out, turn off their camera. It's really hard to focus. So what I want to do is I want to meet synchronously with my online class, a third, a third, a third once a week, so that I'll have maybe 10 students, 10 little squares on Zoom instead of 30 little squares. Okay, so that's my idea. So how am I going to do that? So I've got to divide my class into cohorts, basically a Monday cohort, a Wednesday cohort, and a Friday cohort. And they're going to do, they're going to be kind of like we've heard about these pandemic bubbles, right? They're going to be bubbles, three bubbles. So someone that entered a class with 30 people, no, it's not going to go that way. You're going to be in a class with 9 other people for all intents and purposes. Okay, and so they've got their bubble and they're going to go through, but how does this even work in a math class? Because sometimes we do things according to a sequence, right? Well, I'm going to have rolling due dates. So you can see an example of this. And there it is. Okay, so this is a page from my Blackboard shell. I'm building it as we speak. I think I've gotten up to week 5. Woohoo! All right, so this is module. This is actually week 3 because I have a module 0 because I'm a nerd. So we've got module 2. That's the 3rd week. And so you can see that they're going to have different due dates depending on which cohort they're in, the Monday, the Wednesday, the Friday cohort. Now, I'm hoping to decide who goes in which cohort. I'm going to send them out a survey and ask them which day would work better for you to be synchronous with me. Give me a first choice and a second choice. And I'm hoping I can at least honor at least the second choice. So you can see that they have 3 big things to do each week for me, and they are staggered in the days. And basically, their due dates for discussion board and quiz is 2 days after they meet synchronously with me. So what we have, instead of 3 lectures a week, I'm going to have a synchronous day. I'm going to have an asynchronous Desmos day, which is Desmos mixed with videos. And then I'm going to have a heavier video day. So I'm structuring it like three things like that. Um, so Anne, can you move on to the next one? Doo-doo. Okay. Oh, I have to move on to mine. I'm doing it too, but you can't move my slides. Anne, come on. Oh well. Okay, I have to also move my slides to see what they say so they're big enough. Okay, so you can see um, I have these separate cohorts, and I also have them divided into separate bubbles for discussion, because I don't know if you've ever done a discussion board before with a whole bunch of students. If you have a whole bunch of students, the originality just starts to fall off a cliff, and folks just sort of keep reposting ideas, and you really lose the back and forth. So I have my bubbles in those separate discussion cohorts as well. And you can do that on Blackboard. And now I know, and I'm sure you can do it on a whatever LMS that you use, learning management system that you use. So, so like I said, we've got three kind of big events for each week. The synchronous day is and so that's going to be there's going to be an expectation that everyone has their video on. I'm having one reason I decided to go online, and I know a lot of you can't make that choice. You've got to do what you've got to do. But since I had the choice, I'd rather see people's faces. I have a lot of trouble kind of if people's faces are covered up to see the understanding or even to recognize. And so I want to see them on Zoom. I want to see their faces. And so the video needs to stay on. Then I'm going to break them up into breakout rooms, kind of like you did with the last math session at the tables. And again, 10 is more doable for that, for me to jump into the different breakout rooms. With 10 of us, we'll have time for student presentations where all of us are together and the students take turns making presentations. And then on the synchronous days, a lot of us will, yes, and everything I'm saying, the coolest thing about everything I'm saying, I think, is if you are teaching face to face, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, third, that's the same dang thing, right? My synchronous day is your face to face day. It's the same thing. So guess what? If you like have to change things up mid semester, it'll go the same way. And so, sort of, your modality will stay the same and it would be less disruptive, I think. I think that's cool. And so, we're going to have a Desmos activity that everyone works on together in the breakout rooms on the synchronous day. Okay, so the next day, the asynchronous day, and actually calling it, I actually want my students to have done their asynchronous work before they meet with me synchronously. So the asynchronous day one is Desmos with embedded videos. And so Chris is here. We're going to have some Desmos workshops this week, and he can show you how to do that. He has totally, after meeting him, I have just changed things up using Desmos interactively. I'm very excited. I'll just say a little technical thing. Folks in the Smoky Mountains, a lot of us have internet problems, and so our students need really small videos, like not small that way, but small memory way. And so there are lots of ways to do it. I found Screencast-O-Matic is a pretty inexpensive, I think a year subscription is like $9. There are lots of things your school districts or whatever have things. But when you make videos, think about how big they are. If your student has to download them somewhere else to take them home, tiny videos are the thing. So you can see I have a little picture here, a little screen capture of a Desmos slide, and then there's a video of me in there. And so they watch the little video and then they go to the next slide. And for me, the smaller the better. 2 to 7 minutes, just short, to the point, then on to the next activity. And then their Desmos responses are really form their lab report. So those responses are what I look at for their activity for the day. It's like their lab report. And I don't want to hog up too much time. So um, I'll move on to the last. So asynchronous day 2 are more, it's less interactive, more videos. But again, just seeing my son when he has to open a 1 hour video, just his face just falls. And it's so much kinder to do lots of little videos because you can watch them and then you can go get something to drink or what, and you could press pause. I know you could do that, but you feel like you haven't made any progress. So little videos. So you can see on that slide what I've done is I've recorded several, and I'm also curating videos for them, videos that I've watched and think are really good. And then after they do that, um, to watch them, I have a short quiz. So that's my structure, and I will pass the baton.
So I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about just some examples that I use to really engage students. Like so many of you, moving online, I was worried about missing out on discussions and some joy that comes with doing math together. And hopefully you'll get a lot of that this week, but that's really what I wanted to make sure was part of my online classroom. So a little bit about my class before COVID, just so you can kind of see what things were like. So here are some pictures from my classroom. I was teaching geometry and advanced pre-calculus. And like I'm sure many of you, so much of my class revolved around small group discussions and getting up and moving around. And I was worried about losing that. And so I'm just going to share a few things that worked for me that made class feel a little bit more like it was in the classroom while we were online. So the first tool that I really loved was Google Jamboard. So if you haven't used Jamboard, it's part of the Google suite. If you go just like you're looking for Google Docs or whatever and keep hitting more, you'll find Google Jamboard, or you can go to it directly by typing jamboard.google.com. And it's a collaborative whiteboard, but you can have up to 20 different slides, and you can share it and have different permissions just like you do with any Google Doc, whether people can just see it or do it. So here's a picture of, just like you'll have a page that shows all of your Google Docs. Here you can see I had many Jamboards by the end of the semester, but kind of how you can see it. So just to give you a quick intro to what you can do on Jamboard. Thanks. So Jamboard doesn't have a ton of different features, but in some ways I like that because it was very simple for students to pick up and use. So it has a sticky note feature where students could type, which students found really helpful. Especially if you're using it on an iPad, it's really easy to draw on, or you can try to use the touchpad feature. As you can see, you can import video pictures, whether it's a cute kid with a dog, or what I found really helpful were screenshots of either problems or graphs or things like that. So there are just a few different things you can do. So what I really used Jamboard for were my warm-up problems. And throughout the entire year, I had students creating warm-up problems for the class. And that's something I wanted to continue as we moved online. So we had that kind of continuity. And so a student, they knew whose turn was up next. They would email me a problem. I'd always have a backup problem just in case something happened on their end or for days where that wasn't appropriate. I would then quickly create a Jamboard. It took about 2 minutes once I had my process down. And I knew I would have 4 groups each day. So I would just create 4 slides that had the exact same problem on every slide. And that was really just copying and pasting a picture on 4 slides. And then I would share the Jamboard link through the through the Zoom chat. And students could click on that when they went to breakout rooms. We'd go into 4 breakout rooms. They would get to work on it. So if they were in breakout room 1, they would work on slide 1. If they were in breakout room 2, they would work on slide 2 and so forth. But one thing that was kind of nice was they were able to go see other people's slides. So they were very used to in class knowing that we were going to discuss different strategies, and they would want to see how their classmates were also doing it. And so they could kind of peek at other slides to get ideas or to talk about it. And they mentioned in surveys at the end of the year that they thought that actually felt a lot like class. And then we would come back together and I would be able to share the whole Jamboard. We'd go through the 4 slides and each group would get to share their strategies, which was really a nice way to bring it back together. So just here's an example, and I know it's probably hard to see what's going on here, but I was teaching about combinatorics in, conditional probability for this problem in our advanced pre-calc class. And a student had made a wonderful problem. And here you can see the 4 different groups work, which I think was really great because each group really got to adapt how they were doing things. So whether they were writing on things, whether one student from a group would add a picture of something, or maybe they were just more comfortable typing in the sticky notes. So they really got to choose how they did that, which was really nice. And you can see they didn't even all come with the same answers, especially this was a difficult problem. So we got to all come back and talk about it, which is really nice. And then since this was part of Google, it was really easy to link to our Google Classroom for them to go back and see what they did. So to answer Sloan's question that she just typed, it's saved there just like a Google Doc. We could put it right into Google Classroom, and they had access to go back and see not only their thinking, but their classmates' thinking as they reviewed different topics. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, so I, again, plug for Chris's session on Desmos tomorrow. I'm not going to tell you how to use Desmos, but I really, every day in my class, every unit in my class, we'd have really fun collaborative review games, and it's something students kind of associated with our math class. And so I wanted to have some way to have something that was kind of similar, especially to end the year. So this was an activity that I did at the end of advanced pre-calculus. And they weren't going to have a final exam, but I still wanted them to kind of reflect and see how much they had learned the entire year so that they could feel confident going into calculus next year. So we had done a lockbox or an escape room activity before where they had answered lots of questions. So this was actually the Desmos that was sent to them, but I liked kind of recalling what they had done in the classroom to help them feel that connection. So we had boxes with actual locks where they solved puzzles and got clues to unlock them. But this was a little different. So they came to class and I emailed them this Desmos link. They were in their groups in breakout rooms. And this is what they found out. They found out that their goal that day was to hack the Gmail, a Gmail account that I made, which is called APC Lockbox for our class. And they didn't quite know what that meant yet, but that was okay. So they just knew it was another challenge like they'd been used to in class, and they had about 45 minutes to do it. Okay, so you'll notice, there's so many great features about Desmos, and what they first saw was this card sort. You can see there's lots of different trig expressions on it, and it didn't even really give them any direction. So they had to talk with each other and discuss what they thought they were supposed to do. And so, they quickly noticed I was jumping in and out of the breakout rooms, which was really fun. And they quickly noticed, oh, okay, I see that this trig expression is equal to this. Let's try matching them up. And then if we go on to the next slide, we can see that once they all got them matched up, something new appeared. And there were lots of oohs and ahs. I loved being in the room when they first noticed that. And so using Desmos computational layer, this was instead of a message that popped up when they had all of the answers correct, they just got an A. And so it went through this. They had 10 different questions that they solved. And it turned out that those 10 letters created the password to the Google account that they saw earlier. So when they solved all of those puzzles, if we go to the next slide, they had that password and they went to Google, they went to Gmail and they typed it in, and there was one email waiting for them in that account. When they opened that, it had a gift to celebrate and said how proud we were of them. And it was kind of a tradition in our class where they got candy in the boxes, and I couldn't physically get them candy through their computer screens, But I made a Google Doc called Math Candy that just had fun math books to read or fun websites where they could get problems, podcasts I recommend, things. And I promised if they come back, the next time it's safe for me to give them candy, I'll have candy waiting for them. So it was a moment where, normally when the teacher went into the breakout room, there would be this pause and they'd be like, okay, Mrs. Dennett, how do we do this? And this was one of those activities that I could come into the room and I wasn't even noticed. They were so interested in finding out what these puzzles were. And without any prompting, you can see that they got very into kind of sending their own emails to this Gmail account to have other emails waiting for each other. And I, of course, had it up, so I was monitoring. And if you were nervous about having students having access to this account, another way to do it would be to give them the email address through the codes and have an automated message sent up if they sent that email a message. So if you were worried about having an account that they could suddenly start sending people. But I had it up just in case I needed to shut it down. But they had a great time with it. 3 different classes did it. And they all kind of on their own sent messages to each other even. And it was something that was maybe competitive in the way that they felt that they could, they were excited about it, but everybody had the chance to win. Every group was successful. And there were even some who knew me well enough that they guessed the password before they got through all 10 questions. And I would go into the room and they're like, we know the password, but we want to finish up this question. We want to make sure we get it. And so it was just a really nice way to kind of have that joy in class.
All right, so I love all of these ideas. Again, we're giving you a few different perspectives for things we've tried or that we're trying to use that are maybe not what you've already heard for the past couple months about online teaching. So we're going to move on to talking about a couple different alternative assessments besides just proctoring students online, perhaps using proctoring software or something like that. I know different options are available to you based off your institution. We'll have some time at the end of the session when we present for us to discuss, to brainstorm, and to think about what our own challenges and difficulties could be, as well as how to solve this. So the first thing I want to talk about is the use of oral exams in a math class. I teach geometry for pre-service teachers, but I think that something similar could very much be modified for, say, geometry in high school classroom. So I implemented this spring. I actually already was teaching an online class before the pandemic. For these pre-service teachers, we had a geometry class that was already online that met once a week for 3 hours. And so we did oral exams. This was part of an overarching goal for my students to better learn how to communicate in mathematics, both in writing and in presentations. So I gave everyone 10 minutes for their midterm with a choice of problems from different categories, rather than giving just like a bank of 200 problems for them to pick out of, which I've heard some people use as well, and that could be effective in your case. I decided that big topics were the most important thing, as well as different formats. So in my case, if you look at my slides, I asked students to choose 2 different questions from 2 different categories. So they had, at that point, the overall mathematical topic of congruent figures, of area measure, and of angle measure. And then within those, they had to choose at least 2 different methods for how to answer a question. So for example, we had say, fill in the justification, and these are I might give a partial solution and then students would have to explain why it worked. Critiquing student work was another possibility. Again, for pre-service students, pre-service teachers who are students at a university, it makes sense for them to be assessing what a potential future student might be writing. But if you're doing this in a, say, high school class, I think evaluating finding a mistake or evaluating an example problem would be another way to do this. And then in our geometry class, we also taught constructions. So this was online. I didn't want them to just do a construction in front of me, even though we did use some electronic tools for this. But again, I was emphasizing justification. So they had to talk me through, and I would kind of try to do the construction live while they were talking me through. So for the oral exam, I gave them a rubric ahead of time so they knew what the categories would be as well as how it would be graded. And I really emphasized that I was grading based off of the justification. In particular, I handed out a rubric ahead of time, which I'm happy to share. I just didn't put them on these slides. that basically was assessing on content, on clarity, as well as the use of logic and definitions. So in all of those, they had the categories of emerging, developing, and achieving. And in this class, because they do a lot with written assignments, they've seen this rubric in terms of me grading their mathematical proofs before. So it was exactly the same rubric. And we had a discussion in our class about how if you have an oral exam, maybe you're not going to order everything perfectly. So whereas in writing, you have a lot more time to actually make sure that your justification is in the correct order. So I didn't dock them points for that. But for the oral exam live, they did have to still use logic and definitions, even if, as they were explaining things live, they didn't put everything in exactly the perfect order. So another alternative assessment, Emily will tell you about.
Yeah, so at Columbus Academy, some of my awesome colleagues, Chris and Rachel, had started using group tests in some of the classes. And so this was a normal thing in our classes where before an individual test, students worked they had one copy of the test. Students were in groups of about 3 to 4. They each had a different color pen and they would work together, work through problems, some of them more difficult than what they would see on an individual test, more collaborative worthy. And then they would get feedback before they took their individual test. And this was something that I was very nervous to change to online. And in fact, my kind of gut feeling was that students may not want to do this online. But I asked them, do you want to do group tests? And overwhelmingly, they wanted group tests. They did not want that to be taken away as their kind of practice or scrimmage before they took an individual test. And so it actually worked out really well. We always type them up in Google Docs anyways, and sharing a Google Doc with them in their group, they made a copy of it. And then I didn't really put any restrictions on how they filled that in, but students were really creative in the way they used their tools. So you can see in the one picture in the upper left, some students used different color font when they were typing things. And it was really cool because you could see then who added what. Some students used their Apple Pencil and their iPad and were able to write on things. And then some took pictures of their work and then imported it. And it was really cool because in the groups I heard as I was going around to see what was going on, there was just as much conversation as there had been in the classroom. But then they also worked out different ways among their own groups about how they wanted to structure it. So some had one person who was in charge of the Google Doc, and then the group members sent things and they added it. Or some of them, they were all on the Google Doc. And so in a lot of ways, it added a lot more of their own autonomy about how they did things than we could even do in the classroom. In the classroom, everybody was just writing, but here they had so many different ways that they could add things, which was really nice. And so electronically, it was still really easy to grade things or to add comments and to send it back to them so they got that really quick feedback. So that was one way that we did assessments.
Really quickly, while we have the question pulled up, Emily, how did you have students, or how were the equations written in your Google Docs?
So there is a Google Chrome extension called Equagio that I use to put things in there. Google Docs also has a simple equation editor if it's not something too complicated that you're trying to use.
Great, thank you. And I'm navigating slides right now, so I can't share the link. But if anyone happens to have that link to the Google extension and throw that in the chat window, thank you. So the last thing we're going to end on is a little bit of advice before we go into a discussion. So again, we are not researchers about online teaching and learning, but what I thought I'd share today is a few ideas about what I did wrong and what you should not do for your online teaching. So the first thing I made a mistake on is that I tried to use too many new technologies at once. All of us have been teaching online for various reasons for a few years now. And so when we list tools, we might list a lot of things at once. But I learned my first semester teaching that was way too much. So I had been trying to use Zoom for meetings, use Canvas for my learning management software. I used Piazza because it had an anonymous feature at first, and then we used Google Sheets as well. And I realized that on top of all of this, my students were struggling more with learning all the technology than with the math content, and they were getting frustrated. So I highly recommend sticking with what your institution already has. Start simple. If there's something that you can adapt from the normal face-to-face version to a simple online form, do that first, even if there's technically a better tool. Do that rather than doing too much. It'll save you a bit of troubleshooting as well. The second thing I made a mistake on is I tried to do everything on my own. So while I was using all these different technologies and realizing that was way too much, I got in over my head trying to do tech support. It's definitely helpful, of course, as an instructor to help your students when they ask, but also don't reinvent the wheel. If you're using something like Zoom and you don't have the device that all your students have, Zoom and all the other technologies have their own tech support already. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. You don't need to make your own videos on how to use the technology if they already exist. And I know sometimes you want to add in a personal touch, which is great if you have the time and resources. If not, students are totally understanding if you direct them to the official Zoom tech support page. The third thing I tried to do was to do everything perfectly, which was also not a great idea. I tried to have everything organized perfectly. I tried to sorry, too many devices and something to slow down right now. I tried to use email for late assignments. And then I realized that, that's my previous note. I tried to use, as an example, I tried to use email for late assignments at first. And I wanted to be very understanding for students to make sure that everything worked out perfectly. And I got really frustrated when they would submit by email and then they'd be really worried that their technology didn't work. And they submitted something at 12:01 instead and were stressed out the whole night. So later I learned that I can integrate some of this in Canvas, but at first I was getting upset, my students were getting upset, and what we realized is that it's okay. We know that there's going to be mistakes. We know that not everything is going to work out perfectly. So maybe you don't have the time to learn all of Canvas's 10 billion features right now. There are going to be some mistakes, and I just remind my students that just like the way we learn math, there is some productive struggle involved for both the instructor and the students. The last part I want to go through is that, well, I am not the expert, certainly, in this learning process I just described. I taught some awesome students, and they gave me so much useful feedback throughout the semester and the terms that helped me to adapt to do better. So in particular, my students are a unique bunch who are teachers in their own high schools, but they also were students taking my online classes. So a few things from a couple of them. Justin Lee, who teaches in East Tennessee, says that as a teacher, his advice is to make a calendar of events for your students to follow, which many of you probably already do, but make it in a format that they can find digitally in a very simple manner. They will be more likely to succeed if you give them the assignments and the videos in a systematic form. The second piece of advice from someone who was, again, also a teacher and an online student at the same time, Teresa Nelson, who taught at Oak Ridge High School, also in Knoxville, Tennessee, she said that from the perspective of a student, she thought that it was useful to realize that during online classes to really make yourself focus. It's not helpful if you're trying to multitask, which is way too easy to do. And there's so many devices, there's the kitchen around the corner where you can get snacks and so on, right? I mean, certainly get up and take a bathroom break as needed, but it's so easy when you're learning from home to have lots of distractions, to not have somebody breathing over your neck and seeing that you're checking your smartphone, right? So she mentions that it's helpful to particularly explicitly tell your students to focus on class while you're in class, and to also be patient with the teacher and fellow students. For online learning and teaching, as we've realized right now as well, there are always some technical glitches. We'll sort those out. We are working on that. It also takes a longer amount of time than we might be used to for everyone to gel. So since we aren't able to be in the same physical space, there's a lot of, say, body language that we don't necessarily see. We don't have as many side conversations when we're all muted. And so it just takes a little longer, but we can totally build community still, even in an online classroom, doing a lot of the same things that you normally do. So moving on then, there's a couple questions and discussions. I think most things were answered as we were going through, but I'm going to ask the other facilitators to unmute themselves. And then just because the table format might be a little confusing, and just so that we can all hear all the answers right now, let's just stay here. And then if anyone has questions, you can type it in the chat window, and then one of us will answer it.
So Emily, I have a question with the Google Jamboard. Is that linked to each student, and do their responses like stay saved? So could I go back and look?
Yeah. So once you put it in there, it's there, unless someone erases it or something.
Right.
But
yeah, Mary was saying her students would like erase each other's stuff. Mean. So, but okay. All right, and here's a question from Kim. Hello, Kim. Do you need Google Suites to use the Jamboard?
I think if you have a Google account, just like a personal one or anything, you can go in and have Jamboards, just like you would Google Slides or anything like that.
Okay, and let's see. What did you use to record your lessons of you teaching to deliver to your students? I'm going to type it. I'm not employed by them. Lots of things are fine, but this is just what I used. Screencast-O-Matic. Last semester, I used Edge Creations. Okay, but I like Screencast-O-Matic because it puts my face in the corner of it. Edu Creations, I was just like, it was like a Khan Academy video, and I was, yeah, Screencastify, yep. It was like a Khan Academy video where I was this disembodied voice. My kids' teachers used Loom, and Loom is awesome because your face is a circle, and I think that looks nicer. Screencast-O-Matic, my face is a square, but I'll take it. It's all right. But I like them to just see me being, goofy and, like something going on in the background. I think that just makes us look real. And so I like that a lot. But I use it with a document camera. I'll be right back. So my school got me an Elmo, and I'm really, really happy. So I have an Elmo here and Screencast-O-Matic, and I do like a hands and pans, like in cooking shows where they have the hands in the pans. That's what I do. I just have it on a sheet of paper. And again, I've got my hands there. I think it makes it look more real. But you could use the iPad too. And now, if you have an Apple, there's something called Sidecar, right? Do y'all know about Sidecar? Sidecar is on the newer Macs. It will let your iPad be a second screen to your. Is this ringing a bell? Anyway, it's called Sidecar, and it's an option on the newer Macs. So you can write on your iPad, and it'll go up on the screen.
I'll also add in that I've used Zoom just to record my own videos, though most of the time I do live classes. But for some short like technology tutorials where I do want a custom touch or some actual math short videos, I've just used Zoom in a room by myself, and then I record it.
Were they big videos though, Anne? Like so memory or go ahead.
So that's something to watch on your devices as well. So I did not have that particular problem with my setup, but it's worth checking whatever you're using. Make sure that the videos aren't so huge that the students can't ever watch them, but also make sure that they're not so tiny, I suppose, that you can't read anything that you're writing, for instance. I just want to make sure that we try to answer a few more of these questions. So I think we got Tammy's questions. I think this might be a question for Emily. Can you see students' names in Jamboard?
Sure. So while someone's writing something, you can see however they're logged in. So if it's anonymous, you'll just see anonymous whale or whatever it is. Once it's written, though, you can't really, it's not quite as nice as Google Docs or something where you can go back and see who added things.
And then related to Google before we move on, and then also there's a couple of questions that are related. So earlier when Sloan was talking, someone asked whether for Google Classroom, whether you'd have 3 separate classes if you're doing some sort of cohort model. And I don't know if anyone's used Google Classroom in particular here.
I use different classrooms for my different sections, even when we were face-to-face, just because if due dates are a little bit different or, you know, whatever, somebody's schedule got messed up, it was nice to be able to send just messages to certain groups, which you could probably do with more settings. But I found it helpful to have different classrooms for different sections.
I think related to this question, there's one about if I teach middle school, are you recommending that I teach one new concept per week? This teacher has 120 students, so they'd see them 1 time per week and use the other days for practice or assessment. Sloan, I think that's right.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, I'm actually kind of flipping it. So the new concepts, they may be getting that asynchronously. And then synchronously, when I have them, that's going to be high touch. Although you can't, there's no touch. Virtual high touch, right? It's going to be like a lot of back and forth questions about that new concept. Does that make sense? So when I can't be there, I may introduce some new things, right? Start them thinking. But then when I'm with them, I want to say, okay, y'all looked at that. Now let's talk about it. And then go through very interactive activities together. And then I see from Charity, hello Charity, if you go half, and I know in your county, yeah, internet like mine is not great. Could you stagger them where, you know, half? Could you basically do the same sort of thing? And when they're in an asynchronous off week, for those kids, maybe give them a jump drive of stuff, or while they're with you, they can reload their jump drive for folks that don't have internet. And so one group would kind of be ahead of the other, or that very first week when you meet with the group A face to face, do some activities that are kind of I don't know, timeless or something that wouldn't be so that could go at any place in the course. Anyway, we'll talk. Call me.
So I know that there's really quickly, there's several questions. We're trying to catch up with everything in the chat window, but in case we don't get to everything in the next 6 minutes, our emails are now on the screen. You all have heard which areas where we talked about. If you can't remember, just email all of us and we're happy to answer questions afterwards. Emily, go ahead.
Oh, there's a comment in the Q&A about Jamboard costing money, and I don't make any money off of them. But if you do just Google Jamboard, I think there is some physical board or something that's different that does cost money. But that's why I recommend just in your browser, type jamboard.google.com, and it will take you to that website that I showed you, and that's completely free. It's very confusing. I was confused at first.
I'll mention, let's see, the question about security and managing, for instance, Zoom, which I think all 3 of us have experience teaching with. One way to manage that is, one, make sure Zoom is updated. They have actually been enabling more features throughout. But if you have a class in particular, you can make sure that only your class can access your Zoom link. You can require a password, for instance. Sometimes in one of my cases, I'm actually using my Zoom password as a math problem. And of course, I don't want to bar entry for students into the class, but it should be something that's easy enough for them to jump into. That's one way to do it. Make sure you have the emails. And then otherwise, I haven't had too many issues with Zoom in particular. There's also a question in the Q&A about assessing students and know that they aren't cheating. So this is the reason why we decided to talk about these 2 alternative assessments today. I think that that is a big question that a lot of people are trying to find the best way to answer right now. So I would look into what your institution is doing in terms of test proctoring, for instance, but I personally think that the best way to assess students is to change the questions and the format. So I think that there's ways. Frances Su, for instance, wrote an awesome book and gave a really great webinar recently about rewriting questions to capture things like students reflecting on their growth and students thinking about their mistakes and describing that to you. So I think there's ways that we can reword existing problems and questions, in some ways maybe even personalize them to that student, and for them to demonstrate to us that they have learned something from the class.
I had a colleague who told me about how she used oral exams in Calculus 1, and she gave her students a list of problems ahead of time to work on and said, the oral final exam will be 2 of these problems. And really, she said that list, that was really the final, right? Getting ready. But then in the oral exam, she had them walk her through the steps of the problem. And she felt like that worked really well.
And during the group test, I couldn't guarantee that they weren't looking up something, that otherwise I wouldn't have had them do. But, going around to the different breakout rooms, I could hear them discussing it and knowing that they were really thinking about the concepts behind the problems and how they were working it out. So I was able to hear the students do the problems rather than just seeing an answer that they turned in.
Karen has a question about, do the students submit the oral exam, a video? My friend just did it live on Zoom. And the great thing was she could grade it as time went by. What are you doing?
Sloan, can you say that one more time? It just cut out for me.
Yikes. Probably my children are playing video games. So we had a question about, should the oral exams be videoed? Are they videoed or are they live? My friend did the oral exam live with her students, and the benefit was she, even though it was 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, she could grade simultaneously.
And I did something similar in my own class, but I completely understand, as for instance, Mandy was saying that in some classes that oral exams are just not feasible. Right. So that's actually true in my own case for my freshman classes, that we cannot do oral exams because we have literally thousands of freshmen taking math classes at the university. So we use a different exam format for them, where in their case, there's a lot of written answers. There's more writing than they were used to expecting. So that's something, we do have coordinated classes in our particular case across lots of sections, but we have tried to incorporate more writing actually throughout the term anyway. So it wasn't completely unfamiliar for them to have more writing in their exams this spring. And any other thoughts about large sections or many students? It's something our entire community is probably working on right now. So those are a few responses and suggestions for those who might find it useful. We are at the end of the hour, so I will say thank you all again for joining us. Thanks to Sloan and Emily as well. Feel free to shoot us an email at any point. Again, if you have any questions about anything we talked about, if you want to talk about other ideas that you want to try out, we are happy to answer those questions as best as we can. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you in a later session.
Bye, everybody. This is great. Look at all those thank yous. It's so fun. Love it. Bye, everyone.